Hello, my name is Ezio Arciniaga, and I am here with Bob Dudley, Dr. Bob Dudley, and we are going to be interviewing him today with regards to his program, Everyday Evangelism. He's a best-selling author and also the executive director of the Laura B. Walker Foundation. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Ezio. Glad to be here.
Well, before we begin to ask you a little bit about the Everyday Evangelism program, I'd like to know a little bit about you. Tell us how you first came to know Christ.
Sure. I love to share that story. I grew up in Southern California. My folks were nominal Catholics. As a matter of fact, I joke now that we were CEOs, Christmas and Easter only Catholics, because my folks went to church religiously twice a year. Well, because of that and the way they lived, by the time I was 12 years old and it was time for confirmation, my mother said, now you're going to be a man. You can decide whether or not you want to continue in the Catholic faith. I decided I was an atheist. I decided I didn't believe that God existed. Mm-hmm. So pretty arrogant for a 12-year-old, I know, but that's how it was. And then when I turned 14, my folks decided to move to Massachusetts, where my father, who was a truck driver, thought he could find better work. Well, while they were in Massachusetts, myself and my younger brother and sister had to stay in Vermont with my dad's sister, my Aunt Barbara. Well, she had a rule in her house that if you're going to be in her house, you have to go to church. And she went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We had youth group on Friday night. We were in church all the time. Long time. Well, I started making friends and getting to know all the kids at church. And then she announces we're going to Bible camp. Well, I had no idea what Bible camp was. I grew up in the cities. This was out in the country. Turns out what Bible camp is it's Sunday school every morning, sports in the afternoon, and then they bring in different speakers at night. Well, on Wednesday night, they had an evangelist there. And at the time, I had no idea what an evangelist was, but he was there. He spoke. I don't know what he talked about. I was sitting in the back of the chapel with the other troublemakers. But at the end of his talk, we stood up and they were singing a hymn, and he asked a question I never heard before, Ezio. He asked, are you 100% sure if you died that you'd go to heaven? And instantly, I knew there was a God, I knew there was a heaven, and I knew I wasn't going there. So tears streaming down my face, I got out of my seat and I walked to the front. Found out later I had this entourage of my aunt, my uncle, all my cousins and friends that had been praying for me all summer were following me down to the front. I got down on my knees and somebody took out a Bible and showed me 4 simple verses about how I could know for sure if I died that I'd go to heaven. Mm-hmm. And that changed my life. It's been phenomenal since then.
Wonderful. So how did you come to the point in your walk with God where you felt compelled to tell others about Jesus?
Wow, that's a great question too, Ezio. Let me tell you what happened. I was saved, like we just talked about, when I was 14 years old, and I thought I was a great Christian after that, nominal at best. I taught Sunday school classes. Once in a while, I prayed when I thought about it. I read my Bible every once in a while, and thought life was going along just well. And then in my 40s, one day I went forward in church. I was a very successful astronautical engineer, retired from the Air Force. My wife and I had a great life. And I did something crazy. I went forward and told God that I'll do whatever you want. You just have to tell me what it is. And it was phenomenal because within a matter of a day or two, I had this uncontrollable urge, and an urge that had never really been there in years and years and years, this urge to go out and tell people about Jesus. I didn't know how to do that. I just knew that I had to do that. That's what God had laid on my heart to go do. And I'll tell you what, Ezio, for 6 months, I went out to, we were living near Annapolis, Maryland, so I would go out with my wife to the Annapolis Harbor, and we would walk around for an hour or two with the express purpose of talking to people about Jesus, and I did not talk to a soul. Eventually, we figured, well, maybe we just need a conversation starter, so we started taking our little dog. We had a Pomeranian named Shadow. We'd take Shadow with us and walk around, and sure enough, it was a conversation starter. I still didn't know how to get on the gospel. I still didn't talk to anybody about Jesus. So I knew I had to, and I didn't know what to do. So I found a couple of mentors. I found some friends that knew how to share their faith, and I watched them, and I took classes with them, and eventually I learned how to share my faith. And I'll tell you what, if getting saved rocks your boat, you haven't seen anything until you've started telling people about Jesus and what he can do in their life.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And how long after this time in your life did you transition into full-time ministry?
Oh, there you go. This was great. We had, like I said, I'd hooked up with these different people that could show us how to share our faith. And one was this group that would go into county fairs and state fairs and set up a booth, and they would use these little bracelets to share their faith with people. So we started doing that and saw a lot of people getting saved. And at the same time, Kathy and I had started going to seminary we thought we would maybe learn the theory behind what we were trying to do practically with sharing our faith. And while we were in seminary, part-time while we were still working, we decided to take this idea of having evangelism in a booth out to Ohio. And what happened while we were there is we saw in a 1 week time at the Clark County Fair, the home of the 4-H Club, we saw 1,028 people came to Christ in that week. I came back, this was like in September, I came back as high as a kite. I told Kathy, you know what? I was looking at our catalog in seminary. If we keep taking a class at a time, we'll be done in 5 years. I said, if we quit our jobs and go full time, we could be done next summer. We could be out doing this all the time. She said, well, you're crazy. There's no way we could do that. She said, but if you could financially figure out how we can quit our jobs and go to seminary, we'll do it. Well, of course, God figured that out for us, and that's a whole nother story. But we went to seminary full time. Before we graduated, we had been hired as the executive directors of that ministry that we had seen at the fairs. Worked there for several months, wound up starting another evangelism ministry. And then after doing that for 5 years and figuring out all the ropes, we have now started the Laura B. Walker Foundation and Everyday Evangelism.
And so what makes Everyday Evangelism different from all the other programs out there?
Well, here's the key. You know, if you read a book about something and then you go out and try it, a lot of times you'll fall down on your face. Like, for instance, I wouldn't suggest learning how to fly a fighter jet by reading it in a book. That's just not going to work. Same thing with evangelism. Evangelism, it turns out, I found out those 6 months I was walking around not talking to a soul, it could be scary. It could be intimidating. And once you get past that intimidation phase, then it's still, there's still some trepidation and some fear, and I think that's just God making us depend on Him. But you get past that paralyzing fear once you've had some experience. Well, how do you bridge that gap? Well, one of the things I discovered was having a mentor is a great way to bridge that gap. Having somebody that you can go out with and you watch them talk. You've learned maybe the Romans Road, that's what we teach. You've learned this program, but then you go out and you watch somebody actually do it. You watch them day after day go out and engage people in conversation. You watch how they go through the plan. You watch how they deal with objections and questions. You watch how they deal with the different people's different life situations and the different places they are in life when they're hearing the gospel. And you get to learn that it's really not as scary as it should be. And you get to learn the plan works and how to implement that plan. So the thing that makes us different than everybody else is this mentorship phase that where you go out and you watch somebody and you get to just stick with them by their side until you feel ready to try it yourself.
Okay. Now, we've been basically, it sounds like we've been talking about individuals mostly, and really this is what that's about. Mm-hmm. But if somebody would ask you, why should I bring it into our church? What would you say to them?
Well, I say there's four really good reasons why you would want to bring Everyday Evangelism into your church. First off, because of this mentorship program, we help eliminate the fear. You know, and fear is, I think, out there in the church today, one of the number one driving forces behind people not sharing their faith. They're afraid of what's going to happen. I don't know, maybe they're afraid somebody's going to shoot them or something. I don't know, but we have this fear. It's an irrational fear, but it's still a real fear. I know, I felt it myself. So we help eliminate the fear through the mentorship program. The next thing we do is we multiply the time a church has to share the gospel with their community. And the way we multiply that is we're not just going after professional Christians, your pastors, associate pastors, Sunday school teachers, you know, whatever. We believe that the Great Commission is given to all Christians. So what we do is we show you how to multiply the time you have for evangelism by engaging the entire church in a mentorship program. You'll start off with 2 people that will learn this program. After they've done this for 12 weeks, they'll find 2 more people in the church. Now you have 4 people. Those 4 people will go out, the 2 mentors and the 2 trainees, and they'll learn the program. Maybe after that 12 weeks, they're ready, the 2 new ones are ready to share their faith, so they find now there's 4 more people, you've got 8 people. And you just keep multiplying this. It is not uncommon after a year or 2 of this program that your church has 100 people going out sharing their faith. So you multiply the time for evangelism. Another thing we do is we show how to incorporate evangelism in any church program you have. A couple of examples. A friend of ours went on a missions trip down to Central America. He was on a dental team. He wasn't a dentist himself. They had dentists there to clean people's teeth and check for cavities and whatnot. And his job was to entertain the men, women, and children as they came into the clinic to get their teeth checked. Well, what he did is we showed him how to give the gospel in that environment, and he was able to lead people to Christ before they even went in to see the dentist. And then back home, we have another church that we work with that they decided one of their ministries before they met us was to be part of a food bank with other churches, and people in the church would collect food. They would all put it in the central food bank, and then anybody in the community that needed some help with groceries, they could come to that food bank. Well, after they engaged with us, they talked to the food bank about letting them store the food at their church. And then what they did is people would have to come to their church to pick up the food and hear the gospel. I mean, why do we love people to give them food? We love them because God first loved us and God loves them. And what better way to express that love than to share the gospel with them? So not only do they have food to sustain them here on earth, they've got eternity with Jesus Christ through learning about Jesus. Another thing we do, and this goes with the mentorship and engaging the entire church, the fourth thing we do is we show you how to reach your entire Jerusalem. You know, as pastors, Edzio, you're a pastor, you know that you can't reach every single person in your community. There's people in your church that have relatives, co-workers, friends that they can talk to and engage with that you and I will never meet. So having the entire church engaged through everyday evangelism is a way for them to be able to engage the entire Jerusalem.
That's true. I like your question you asked me one time was, what is the fruit of a Christian? And, typically the majority of people, I was one of them, would say, goodness, gentleness, patience, etc.
Right.
But the fruit of a Christian are other Christians.
Absolutely.
And that is correct. The other thing I do enjoy about the program is that, as you mentioned, reaching our city, our community. Just the other day I was at our little girls' basketball practice, and I ran into one of the ladies that we prayed with, and was able to re-engage, and I find myself doing that all the time, and people know me, and we are able to, to continue that conversation, or at least continue to build a relationship, and so it's not something where we come, I can pray with somebody and then I never see them again. They're here. And so that's one of the things I see as a great benefit to the church, that you begin to engage your community. Instead of being afraid of the people outside that don't know Christ, you begin to give them Christ and then grow them outside of your church until they're able to start coming in, or they go to another church. But at least you're building that relationship.
Absolutely.
So I've enjoyed that a lot. Any other thoughts before we say goodbye?
Well, let me just say this. Like Edzio just said, the fruit of a Christian is other Christians. If God plants it, or if we plant an apple tree someplace, we expect to grow apples. A pear tree, we expect to grow pears. And God has planted us in different places around the country, around the world. And where He plants us, He expects to grow other Christians. And let me encourage you, whether you're using Everyday Evangelism or some other program out there, teach your people how to share their faith. I tell you what, if your people can go out there and focus on Jesus and telling people about Jesus, it really takes the burden off of their own problems and their own soul and things that are happening in their lives, and it allows them to see what is really important in God's eyes, and that's growing the kingdom of God.
That's right. Well, thank you, Bob. It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
Yes, it has. God bless.